All right. Thank you. It's 6:55. That's called the January Alameda County Water District Financing Authority meeting to order, please. Roll call.
Directors Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
Weed,
Here.
Fernandez,
Here.
and Huang.
Here. Director Fernandez, would you lead us in the salute to the flag, please? Thank you. Flag.
United States of America. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next item is public comment. District Secretary, can you let me know if we have any members of the public online?
We do not have any members of the public online.
Okay, then I assume at this point, we do not need to make any of the housekeeping remarks
No.
or online?
No, I don't think so. It's just bond counsel that's online right now.
Okay. And do we have any members of the public in the audience that wish to make any public comments regarding the financing authority? Hearing none, let's close the public comment, then move on to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
Fernandez,
Can I vote on this?
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. All right, let's move on to the action calendar. Item 5.1, who would be leading this one?
That'd be
Mr.
me.
Wonderly?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, members of the board. Because the water district is planning to issue revenue bonds this year, and that will require action by the financing authority, we are planning to add some regular meetings of the authority so we can transact that business. We're hopeful we'll be able to conduct that business at the March meeting. But in the event we are not able to conduct it in March, we also want to plan a regular meeting for April. So that way we don't have to meet in March for the sole purpose of scheduling a meeting in April. So again, the desire and hope is that we're ready to go in March, and that will be the only other meeting required this year. And so a resolution is before you to modify the date and time to schedule 5:30 p.m. On March 13th. And then again at 5:30 p.m. And for our Director Fernandez, I really want to point this out. On the second Tuesday of April, the Water District has its normal meeting on the second Tuesday in the month of April, whereas every other month it's the second Thursday. And so the regular meeting that will be scheduled for April would be on that second Tuesday immediately before the Water District meeting. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions on this item.
Questions or comments from the board? Seeing and hearing none. Any questions or comments from our members of the public? No, seeing none. All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move recommendation.
I'll second.
Moved by Director Gunther, second by Director Akbari. Roll call, please.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
Fernandez,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Item 6, debt overview.
Sure, in front of you in the agenda is just a table showing all current outstanding bonds issued by the financing authority. Those were issued in 2015 and in 2022. And the remaining principal on those is just a little under $62 million with an annual $5.9 million debt service payment. And for the last fiscal year, the district's debt coverage ratio is 4.74, which is comfortably in excess of the 1.25 required by the bond covenants and the 2.0 ratio required by district policy. So with that overview, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments from the board?
I have some comments.
Director Sethy.
Yes, just in the interest of providing some knowledge to the board, staff, and public. At a recent meeting We had a presentation from Chandler and Associates, which manages our financial portfolio. And I asked a question in the meeting, which I have been left wondering about still, which was why, as the Fed was lowering short-term rates, was the yield curve not dropping in parallel? Because that was always my experience in the past. And so if you look at the 10 to 30-year rates right now, 10 years about almost close to 4.7, and you go further out and it's higher. And I've still been wondering about it. Yesterday, the economist Paul Krugman, who won the Nobel Prize in 2008, wrote a very interesting article, which I'm going to pass along. By the way, when I was in my late teens, he's only 6 years older than me. He was my guest professor for international trade, which became his expertise. And he was already a young economic prodigy out of MIT in his mid-20s. Amazing. And I've always followed him. So he wrote this article about, is there an insanity premium on interest rates? Which goes back to the election of President-elect Trump. And that this is causing a lot of worry in the bond markets and suppressing the normal rally in bonds that we would normally see. And thus we're seeing a much higher interest rates. So as we go into this new bond environment where we're going to issue new debt, we're probably going to see elevated interest rates on the issuance of that debt. And so I'm hopeful, as we have done in the past, that if there's the possibility of refinancing these bonds at a lower rate, I'd really appreciate the attentive of staff and others to be able to do that. And I'll pass this, I only made one copy of the article, but I'll pass it along to Mr. Wunderlich to share with the finance team.
All right, thank you. And yes, I can assure you that we pay close attention for opportunities to refinance whenever there's some savings to be had.
Thank you.
Director
Please
Wee?
follow up. It's remarkable. The 20-year hit 5% this past week. 10-year, I believe, is actually even higher than approaching 10.9, 4.9. There was a report from Bank of America having a paper loss of $100 billion because they had not anticipated this surge in interest rates and a resulting lowering of the base value of the underlying security. So one strategy I would encourage us to consider is to look at authorizing a fairly long timeline to do the actual issuance. This is going to be a potentially very volatile market, and more time we have, flexibility if we see the trend changing, and they go as a pendulum, but it takes time to swing, and that may be worth our while. I had earlier asked why we could not go through this process once and authorize a number of tranches that we would then, rather than having to repeat each several times the same bond issue. And it was suggested that the underwriting costs are the same whether we do a tranche or issue a complete new security. I'd encourage us to continue the research on that issue to see if there might not somehow be a savings, because we know we want to go to the market at least 3 times, and we want to go through the full process that we're doing now and replicate it 3 times. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wee. Any other questions or comments from the board? No, I think there's no action required for this item.
Correct.
All right, so let's move on to, actually, we do have one member of the public in attendance that generally visit us with comments. Mr. Abreu, we are still holding the financing authority meeting. We're on item number 6, that overview. Do you have any questions or comments for the board? All right, thank you. All right, with that, oh, do we have new members of the public that joined us online? I see at least one. So for those members of the public that's online, we are still in the financing authority meeting, and we're on item number 6, that overview. If you have any questions or comments for the board or staff, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I think we could move on to item number 7, bond disclosure training, please.
Yes, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Kevin Savali and Mr. John Guz, our bond counsel team, who are on the line on Zoom, and will present this training. This is a quick overview type of training. It's not the same comprehensive level that's given to staff, but should hopefully, as board members, help you understand a little bit more what's going on and any roles or responsibilities you may have. And so I will turn it over to them now.
Great. Thanks, John, and thank you, board members, for taking the time to go through this training. And John, I'm not sure if John Guz got the panelist button, so I'm not sure if he's able to join. He's available and ready to do it. If that's something that could be done quickly, fine. If not, no big deal. So we're here. This presentation, as John mentioned, is specifically directed toward the obligations of the board under the federal securities laws. This kind of a training isn't specifically required by the federal securities laws, but it's considered to be best practices, which the district has generally followed with respect to its borrowings in the public capital markets. As John mentioned, we gave a much more longer version of this, an hour and 20-minute version of this to the folks, John's team, and the general manager, who are actually involved in the preparation of the official statement. As I mentioned, we'll be focusing on your specific operations. This will take about 10 minutes. I'll give you a brief overview. John and I will give you a brief overview of the federal securities laws. And again, we'll end with your specific responsibilities. The next page. Why is disclosure necessary? It's necessary because you'll be issuing bonds in the public capital markets. The district could avoid some of the requirements, not all of them, but some of the requirements of the federal securities laws by doing a private placement or a direct purchase with a single institution rather than a public offering of bonds. But it's widely accepted that the lowest cost of capital, the lowest interest rate, is available through a public offering. Investors have rights under the federal securities laws, and the basic right is that the issuer of bonds has to disclose all material information. Next page. The basic statutory underpinnings are the Securities Act of 33 and 34, almost a century old now, adopted in the after the Great Depression and stock market crash. They apply generally to both municipal issuers and corporate issuers. But there's a big difference. For corporate issuers have to actually register with the Securities and Exchange Commission in order to issue bonds or stocks. They have to file an application. The SEC reviews their filings, can make comments. That registration requirement doesn't apply to municipal issuers. So there's no obligation to inform the SEC you're doing this. What does apply equally to corporate and municipal issuers under the federal securities laws are the anti-fraud provisions. And that's what we as Disclosure Counsel, we're Bond Counsel and Disclosure Counsel, we focus on that to assist you to make sure you're in compliance with those anti-fraud provisions. So the next slide. So the basic rule is it shall be unlawful for any person, skip to the second one because that's really the applicable one, to make any untrue statement of a material fact. So full stop. The POS, the offering document that the district uses, and I use district, by the way, these are authority bonds for state legal reasons. But the credit that is being sold to investors is the district's credit. So the district is the one with the responsibility of meeting the federal securities laws. It shall be unlawful for any person to make any untrue statement of a material fact. So the POS, the documents that's used, the prospectus, sell bonds, the bonds to investors will contain lots of facts. It will have many, many tables in it, your revenues, your water sources, your capital improvement program, regulations you have to comply with, a history of how well you've done meeting your rate covenant in the past, regulatory issues, all sorts of things. All of that has to be correct. And we, and primarily John's team and your team at the district, will be responsible and make sure that that happens. The second part of it is the second half. It's unlawful to omit to state a material fact. So there can't be material omissions. And we spend a lot of time with the district's staff, many phone calls, many drafts of documents to make sure that anything that's not in there is added, to make sure there are no material omissions. And it's the course of those calls and multiple drafts that those sort of things bubble to the surface. PFAS, for instance, which isn't as significant an issue for you as it is for other folks. That wasn't in offering documents 5 years ago, 7 years ago. So that's an example of something that might not have been in prior offering documents, but is material now. Next slide. The materiality standard. As I mentioned, it's an obligation on the part of any issuer, including the district, to let investors know all material information. So then the question is, well, what's material? Whether or not there's a substantial likelihood that a reasonable investor or prospective investor would consider the information important. Some issuers, in good faith, think that the only thing investors care about is getting paid on time, 100 cents on the dollar. That is obviously their primary consideration in purchasing the bonds, but they also care about other things. They care about the credit rating on the bonds, for instance, because if the credit rating on the bonds drops after they purchase the bond, it will be worth less in their portfolio in the event they choose to sell it. So they care about litigation, for instance. So if there's an issuer has a significant piece of pending litigation, they'll want to know about that. Even though the issuer will pay the bonds either way, whether they win or lose the litigation, that might create headline risk. That might dilute the issuer's reserves, which is something they care about. So it's not just paying debt service on time, it's also significant financial considerations, the same things that you as board members and district staff think about as important in running your business. Those are the sorts of things that investors want to know about. I'll hand it over to John now for the next couple of slides. John Guz, my partner, who, by the way, I should have introduced. This is my partner, John Guz, who also works with me.
Thank you, Kevin. We can go on to the next slide. So when do the federal securities laws apply, the ones that Kevin just talked about? So they apply to new offerings. So when the district issues new debt in the public capital markets, the federal securities rules apply. They apply to the annual reports that the district agrees to provide in connection with the issuance of its bonds. So those are annual updates to operating and financial information with respect to the district. They also apply to any other circumstance. Oh. Is there a question? Oh, okay.
No, please proceed. Thank you.
Sure. Any other circumstance where an issuer is speaking to the market is also will apply. And whether communication is determined to be speaking to the market will depend upon the official making the statement. So if the individual making the statement is perceived as having a knowledge of the financial condition of the issuer, that will cut in favor of it being speech to the market. It'll also depend on the audience. So this means that public statements made by members of a governing body could fall under speaking to the market. And so practically, if you're going to be making a speech or talking to a reporter for a newspaper article or posting on social media, and you're talking about things that are relating to the financial condition of the district, you want to make sure that information is accurate. And this becomes even more important when the district is in the market with an offering document, because you want to make sure during that period, which for the upcoming bonds will be roughly 5 to 6 weeks toward the end of March or so, beginning of April, you want to make sure that statements that are being made don't inadvertently, contradict what's in the offering document. You want to make sure that those things all align. So oftentimes, if possible, to avoid any type of, information being misconstrued, it's best practice to, not, make statements about the financial conditions, just so that, something, is inadvertently perceived as perhaps being different than what's being in the offering document. So then we go on the next slide. So the district's disclosure. So, as Kevin laid out, you have the official statement, and that's provided to investors. It's, comparable to, a prospectus for a corporation when they're, issuing an IPO or corporate bonds. And, as Kevin laid out, under the federal securities law, it has to contain all material information to investors. So in our circumstance, that would include not only the material information about the district, its operation, financial information, et cetera, but also the material information about the bond. So your maturity dates, interest rates, call features, things of that nature. So all of the important information. And, under federal securities law, the SEC has made it clear, and it's ultimately the responsibility of the district to determine what's material. It's viewed that the issuer is in the best position to know all of material facts. So the liability ultimately resides, and the responsibility ultimately resides with the district. We are there and we work with the district and use our expertise in securities law to talk about issues and make determinations as to what should be included, as well as getting advice from municipal advisors. But the buck stops with the district under federal securities law. So we can go on the next slide. Just a lot of these things Kevin touched upon, but these are just some kind of general principles about what is included in the offering document provided to investors and potential investors, known as the preliminary official statement, and the official statement once we've priced the bonds. You have information about the operations of the district, water supply, facilities, things of that nature relating to how business is run at the district. Description of the capital improvement program, future needs, how those will be funded. How the district has done in the past with its historical performance, as well as projections about future performance, the significant sources of revenue that will be used to ultimately repay debt holders, material legal covenants that provide protection for bondholders, rate covenants, additional bonds tests, regulatory issues, not just ones impacting the district today, but ones in the future that may have impacts on operations, costs, et cetera, making sure that those are, appropriately included. And then information about outstanding debt, and then risks, like Kevin said, litigation, things that are, may not ultimately affect your ability to repay as the issuer, but could have, potential impacts in terms of, price or selling the bonds in the secondary market. So we can go on to the next slide. And here, just kind of a general process, just kind of keep it at a high level. We'll provide a document to John and his staff to, begin updating and providing all the material information. Internally, that document will get to the appropriate subject matter experts for their input. It's encouraged that, individuals working on the updates raise issues so that they can be considered and appropriately determine whether or not they should be included. The district will coordinate with its municipal advisor, our office. And as Kevin said, there'll be multiple iterations of the document going back and forth to the working group, calls, et cetera, to determine what's material and make sure that everything in the document that needs to be in there is in there before it goes to the investors. And then there's typically, a due diligence meeting whereby kind of you have a last chance to ask the questions, vet the information, and make sure that the document that ultimately is going to be provided to potential investors is compliant with federal securities law. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kevin.
And the last slides, the punchline, so to speak, which will focus on your specific responsibilities as board members. What you're not responsible for is double checking the math and making sure every column adds up and making sure the tense is correct and the punctuation is correct. What you're responsible for is assuring yourself that a robust disclosure process is being implemented with senior staff members in the organization actively involved in the process. And we can tell you, so we were bond and disclosure counsel actually in your 2015 transaction, your 2022 transaction. So you folks are good at this. And what I mean by that is you do devote sufficient resources. You have surrounded yourselves. We know what we're doing. Your municipal advisor is very well respected. You typically, so you've surrounded yourself with competent professionals. You have senior staff involved. John takes the lead. The general manager I know is involved, has done the training that I mentioned earlier. As John mentioned, John Guz mentioned, there's subject matter experts are brought in. You know, we can tell sort of when we send out a draft of documents, the nature of the comments we get, the attention to detail. So you should satisfy yourself that a good disclosure process is in place. But in our view, having witnessed it, we believe there is. What you should also do is to familiarize yourself with the official statement. You'll get a chance to look at it. It will come to you for approval prior to the issuance of the bonds. It'll come to you two ways. One, as the district will hold a meeting to approve the district's participation. You'll get it that way. You'll also get it for the authority meeting at the same time. You should familiarize yourself through it, leaf through it. Look at this, look at the headlines, look at the major headers, things like that. But the biggest thing is if you're aware of a particular item of concern, is there something that as a board member gives you particular pause, or you worry about going forward, or you think is an area of potential weakness, maybe not today, but in the future, it's something that you're concerned about for the district going forward, you should make sure that the official statement addresses that topic to your satisfaction. And that is something, you'll get a draft of it. It won't be presented to you as a done deal. You'll get a draft. You'll have the opportunity to engage with John and his staff to talk about the right way. If it's not described correctly, you'll have an opportunity to make sure that it gets fixed before it goes out. During the marketing and sale of the bonds, this picks up on what John Guz talked about earlier in the marketing period. If you do choose to speak publicly about the financial matters or operational matters of the district, make sure it's consistent with that official statement. And the final thing is what we found, we do this a lot. We represent the state of California, lots of water issuers, lots of big cities, LAX. We do this all the time. And what we found is that issuers that are good at it, good at the disclosure process, it sort of comes from the top. And when folks in an organization see that the senior staff care about it, then they'll care about good disclosure. So you're sending a good message, if I may say this, you're sending a good message to the district, to the organization itself, by virtue of the fact that you participated in this process. So that's the end of the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments from the board? Director Wee?
I have.
You want to go
Yes,
first?
quickly. Do we know when we anticipate issuing the bonds?
Yeah, so what we would anticipate from a schedule is that at the March meeting of the Financing Authority and the Water District, the board would approve the sale, and then the actual sale would probably happen sometime in early April.
Director Weed and I have been down here at the district like at 5:30 in the morning to watch the bond sale a couple of times and see the action going on. I'd like to ask the bond counsel, what is the appetite in the marketplace for this type of municipal issuance?
We're actually the wrong folks to ask. We're the lawyers on the transaction. You also have engaged a municipal advisor who handles the financial aspect of it. Having said that, and going outside my lane, a high quality bond, highly rated for an essential service in California, generally is very well received. I can tell you that just from my experience, having done this for a couple of decades. One would expect an issuer such as yourself with a very high rating that, as I said, provides an essential service to your citizens in a sort of economically strong service area. In my past experience, that's the market's had significant appetite for that sort of a bond.
Thank you very much. Those are my only questions.
Director Wee?
Several tracks here. First, to follow up on the earlier conversation we had related to this unique rate structure where long-term rates are going up and short-term rates are going down.
Director Wee, can I ask you to just focus on this item on the disclosure responsibility, please?
Well, this will go into this because it goes to the basic question as to going forward with this at this time. I would ask, maybe we need to ask our marketing people as well, the other group that get involved in this, is to take a look at the option of commercial paper. Commercial paper is generally based on the shorter term rates, far less burden in getting it issued. Can be done on a quiet basis, repurchasing and other restrictions that might be built into the bond issuance are far more acceptable and a much lower cost of issuance. So that is one question I'd ask, is that we take a look at that. The Hetch-Hetchy system with San Francisco, when they went for eventually $6 billion, began with $600 million in commercial paper as they started to scope what they really wanted to spend the money on. And it was a far more flexible and far more savings. The next comes to the cost of issuance. I've seen documents and bond ratings where the bond counsel had hourly rates of over $2,000 an hour. Do you have some feel for what the overall cost of going for a bond would be, and what would be the rates that you would charge for performing this service?
I can't speak to the overall cost. Our rates are, I think, $600 an hour, which is I can definitely represent as sort of the market standard.
Okay,
That's much better than what I could see.
hold on just a sec. I need clarification from staff and council. Staff, would this item be discussed, this specific topic be discussed in March when this comes back to us?
Yeah, so in
right.
March, a part of what's approved will include the cost of issuance.
Okay.
And the cost of issuance will be much less than I think what Director Weed
right.
is fearing based on those comments.
So I am going to ask Director Weed for your patience and hold this question until March, since that will be a agendized item that we could have a discussion at that time, please.
Okay, then I would request in our March meeting that we have at least a discussion of the option of commercial paper in lieu of the initial tranche of, or the initial round of bond indebtedness.
I am going to ask you to sort of hold that thought, or staff to repeat that at the board meeting during the director's comment and agenda request. We will ask that formally document in that, because I do not see that in this
No,
agenda.
that's not related to disclosure,
Right.
but what we could do is either for the full board, or since these questions are primarily coming from Director Weed, perhaps prepare an item for a future Finance and Administration Committee meeting to discuss this ahead of the March board meeting.
That would be great. So I think if Director Weed agrees that we could have this discussion in March, I don't think I need to ask council about how to address this. So thank you very much, Director.
I have the same interest in exploring that question of commercial paper. We have our finance meeting next Tuesday. Perhaps we could just have a light discussion about it.
So the Finance Committee is a week from the following Tuesday,
Oh,
so it's
okay,
not
a
next
week
Tuesday,
later.
but I will get with our municipal advisor and see if we can prepare something by then. If not, we certainly could for February.
Okay. Another point, there are the determination on what restrictions there are on our being able to repurchase these bonds. If we're going in with a particularly high interest rate now and interest rates plunge, they might, the face value may be, have actually increased dramatically. So I'm not, my fear is that we're in a period of time that interest rates are particularly unstable. And it's not a good time necessarily to issue bond debt if you can avoid it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, for our public members attending in person, any questions or comments? No? How about our online audience? Any questions or comments on the presentations? I'm not seeing any hand. I'm just going to say we're done with the bond disclosure training. Thank you very much, our bond counsels. So with that, I think we're done with this item. We'll adjourn the Financing Authority meeting at 6:30, please. Thank you.